Hello everyone, Dave here, and I'm joined today with my friend Chris.
Hi.
Say Chris.
Hi.
We are over at his house, and we're going to be doing a series talking about all of the Ticket to Ride maps. We're going to start with the base game, go all the way through. This happens to be one of our both favorite games. So you can see here is the original box. This says over 1.1 million Ticket to Ride games sold. As of this morning, the latest copy that I saw in the store said over 5 million Ticket to Ride games sold. So this has been a box that has been around for a little while. Chris shows got a little tape on there and everything like that.
Just a little bit of tape on a couple of the edges. It's a very loved box. There's a huge crack in this corner here. I don't know how this happened, but I came home and it was like this. So
yep. So we got that.
We play this a lot.
Yeah, and this board actually is not the original board that came in that box.
No. Another good story with this is I finally won a game after being in a weird slump, and I finally won a game, and the game that I won, the board just almost snapped in half, so I had to purchase a new board, so that's always a fun story to tell.
So what you can expect with this series, we're going to be talking through each of the maps. We're going to talk about some pros, some cons, some strategies, and different things that we go through. So we're going to start with this base game. So this was published in 2004 by Days of Wonder. The designer is Alan R. Moon. One of the biggest things about this is it won the German Game of the Year award, which is the Spiel des Jahres in 2004. And the backstory of this game has to do with around the world in 80 days, and so one of the things was they decided they were going to have this contest to travel around the country. So we're starting off with the United States. So this particular game plays 2 to 5 players, ages 8 and up, and plays anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. And this is the basic form of the Ticket to Ride game. There has been since several other boxed sets and maps that have come out, but this is the foundation for all of that other stuff. And it's got really, really simple rules, which we're going to go over really quickly. And then this is also available both in the physical form and then also as a digital application. So
and the digital app is actually really good, and it actually gets a lot of the feel of an actual game as you play.
Nice. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go over how the game is played. We'll show you what some of the neat things are that are unique to this particular version, and then we'll share some thoughts as we go on. So, let's get started. So the first thing that we want to get to know about this is what is the object of this game, and that is to score points. And the way that we're going to score points in here, we're going to be doing this in 3 ways. The first thing that we're going to do is scoring points by claiming routes that are on the board, connecting different cities in these different segments, and they're based upon the length of them. They're worth a number of points. And if we look down at the bottom of the board, you can see the longer they are, the more points they're worth. So a single route is only worth 1 point, whereas if you can find one that takes up 6 trains, like the one just above us here, it's going to be worth 15 points. That's one way that we're going to be able to score points. The other way that we're going to score points is by completing destination tickets, and we're going to have a number of these that we will acquire over the course of the game. And what they're going to do is show us where on board we're trying to connect in order to score points. And down in the bottom of the corner, it's going to tell you the number of points that they're worth. Now this particular card, and you'll see where it says big cities on here, this is actually from an expansion that we're going to talk about in another episode called 1910, because we could not find the original destination tickets for this game. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyways, what we're trying to do is connect, like for example here, Chicago to Santa Fe. So if we look on the board, Santa Fe is down here, Chicago is up here, and we're going to try to connect them using our pieces on the board. And it doesn't matter as long as they touch each other. You could go all the way up to New York, down to Florida, and around. As long as the two of them touch each other through your route of trains, you're going to be able to score points. And finally, the third way that you're going to score points is by being able to have the longest continuous path of your trains on the board. It's called the longest train, or they call it the Trans-America Express, and whoever has that at the end of the game will receive 10 points. And here is the card for that right here, so you can see how you could do that. Just an example of that. So, anyways, so we have our map here of the United States. So, good way for us to learn geography, wouldn't you say? Although, certain things, for example, let me just point out one thing on the map. If we look down here, Chicago on the map is actually shown in the state of Indiana, opposed to being over here in Illinois. So we cannot count on this for 100% accuracy.
Nope, you're right with that.
Of the game. So, so people around the world playing the United States, Chicago is in Illinois, not in Indiana. So, but does this give us a general idea for our geography?
It
does. So we have a board, all of the different routes, they're different colors, and that's going to correspond to certain types of cards that we're going to need to be able to put our pieces on the board. One thing that I do want to note is that this game is colorblind friendly, and there are, and let me zoom in so you can see this again, that on these particular routes there are symbols within each of the colors so that a colorblind person can distinguish which types of cards they are going to need.
And those symbols also match on the train cards you're going to be receiving at the beginning of each turn.
Right. So, and let's talk about those train cards. Here's a market of cards that are available up at the top, and we are going. Each player is going to receive a hand of 4 cards that you're going to keep secret. So you can see Chris has his hand of 4 cards. He's looking at them, and so we don't really know exactly what he's got to start off with, but we do have cards that are going to be available here. Let me show you one of the cards up close, and so this happens to be an orange one, and if you notice in the corner, here is that little circle symbol, and if we were to look on the board, anywhere there's an orange route, there's going to be a circle in there. Now, one other thing that I want to note about this base game, and this is the only set that uses mini cards. These cards are on the small side. They fit very much inside the palm of my hand. And when I showed you the destination ticket in about the 1910, there's something to show you. The original game, all the cards would be the mini cards, but they have since come out with larger ones. And I will talk about that when we talk about 1910, where the cards will be full size. But we have these little mini cards that we would be using during the game. We're going to be collecting them to claim different routes on the board. So, for example, here, if we wanted to go between Duluth, Minnesota, and this is Helena, Montana over here, we are going to have to collect 6 of those orange cards, or we can use ones that are wilds to play them across the board. But this is the general idea, is we're going to be collecting these cards to do so. Now, also at the beginning of the game, we're going to be dealt a hand of destination tickets. How many are we going to have?
We are going to have 3 face down, and you have to choose at least 2 of them to start with. You are allowed to keep all 3, but you have to keep at least 2.
So these are the destination tickets, and they're going to be different ones with different values. You're going to want to choose them, try to clump them together so that you can complete them.
If they work together, it's great. If they don't, you just have to work with it.
Right. So anyways, on a player's turn, what they're going to do, they have 3 choices. Chris, what are the choices we can do?
The first thing we can do is, probably the main thing you're going to do on your turn, is you're going to take cards.
Okay.
Actually, there's 2 ways to take cards, but I'll explain this one first. You can take train cards. When you take train cards, you can take any combination of 2 cards, either blind off the top of the deck or from one of the 5 that are showing. Once you take a card, it gets replaced. And then I have one more pick, so I could go blind, and these get added to my hand.
Right. Now, there is a thing we talked about, wild cards in there. There's locomotives. If we can find one in the deck, it's going to look like a rainbow-colored train.
Here's one.
Okay, we'll zoom in on that. So with a train like this, if we choose one from the market face up, that's the only card that we can choose that turn. Yep. Because it's a lot more powerful than most of the other cards. And so with the wild card, it can act as any color to help us do completion. Now, if you were to draw a wild card off the top of the deck, if you did a blind draw from the original draw pile there, then nobody's seen it, so you would actually be able to draw another card. However, if you drew a wild in the first one, your second choice, if you chose to go from the market, you cannot take the wild because you've already taken one card before. So that's how we're going to acquire cards that are going to go into our hand. The second way you said we can take cards is how?
Is to take more destination tickets. Let's say you've completed all your tickets somehow throughout the game. When you go ahead and take tickets, you're going to take 3 off the top.
Yep.
And you're going to choose based on what you have. So
right.
Here are some of my choices.
So depending upon where we're going to go in the game here, we have Sault Ste. Marie down to Nashville, we have San Francisco to Atlanta, and we have Calgary to Phoenix. Now, we look at those, and depending upon what we've already have in our hand, what we're trying to do, we're going to try to take cards that are going to match.
That would work in that line, yes.
Yes. Now, you have to keep one. So
you have to keep one, yes.
So in this particular case, one of the strategies that we would want to do, if there's nothing that you can take, or if there's no way you can get it, take the one that's going to be worth the least amount of points, because if you don't have a completed destination ticket at the end of the game, you're going to lose points.
Correct.
Okay. So that's the third thing that we can do that's the second thing that we can do on our turn.
Yes.
And then the third thing that we can do is we can actually claim routes. And this is how we're going to actually put our pieces onto the board. And the way that we're going to do that is by discarding tickets from our hand, the colors matching a route that's on the board. So, if you have any orange cards?
I can grab some.
So, for example, here we have a couple of orange cards. We can do a play like this. We'll just use some cards from the market. And he's going to play 3 orange cards.
So let's say we're working off the one that Dave showed you earlier from Chicago to Santa Fe. So let's just say I wanted to start over in Chicago. It's a little bit harder because it's up north.
Well, this is actually Pittsburgh, but let's say we're going to go there. But let's say we're working on a route that's over there.
Right. So for my turn, I would play my cards and three oranges, and I'm going to start here. And then my next turn, I could potentially build off that if I would like to.
Right. So in this particular version of Ticket to Ride, we are not required to build, like once we start here, we can claim a section over here. We do not have to have a continuous train, like a train route. This essentially, we have everything already built for us. Changes in the future, yes. But so this would be the way that we would claim this route. Now it's worth it's length 3, so according to our chart, that's going to score us 4 points. There's a score track around the outside of the board, which we would move our score marker up 4 points. And that would be our turn. We discard those cards, they go into a discard pile. And so we're just going to continue doing that throughout the course of the game. Now, one thing to notice, if you see on here some of these spots where there are train routes side by side, in lower player counts, I believe when you were playing 2 and 3 players, only one lane is open. So if somebody were to claim, for example, here, the two green ones, another player cannot come and play 2 white to go alongside it. However, if you're playing with 4 or 5 players, then you can, on these dual routes, both of them are open, so multiple players can get in there. So that is for a scaling issue on the game.
Yes, and one other mention I have to do with this market card at the top here. If ever there are 3 wild cards showing, you're going to wipe all 5 of the market cards and you're going to reseed the market with 5 more cards.
Right, and there would normally always be 5 cards out. We just pulled those off to show you how a play would be. So, anyways, we're going to, players are going to continue competing for different spaces on the board throughout the game until the end game trigger of what is it?
One player gets down to 2 or less trains.
Okay, so there's going to be a lot more pieces that are going to be on the board. When we get down to that, what's going to happen is whoever triggers the end of the game, every other player gets 1 more turn, right?
And including the player who triggered the end game.
Okay, so we do not have a variable set of turns. So so those are some of the things that this is going to be how the game is played. Some things, let's talk about, while we have the map here, let's talk about some like key strategies, some things. What did you see like for strategies? What are some of the things to expect in here, Chris? You want anything to say?
short answer would be there are some people that they go for the longest train, which would behoove you to do the longer routes. It does take a little bit longer to do, but if you can somehow connect all of your trains in one continuous loop, that's a hard way to score 10 points, but it's worth it. There is another quick fire way to strategize, and I don't think it's really strategy, but you can hoard cards a lot of the time, and
you starve the market.
It could block everybody from picking the cards they need.
Right. So one of the things that I find in this one, in this particular map, is there is some tight competition for key routes, because you're like certain areas in here. If something gets shut off,
awful.
It's going to be really hard for you to complete destination tickets. A lot of times, like going out of New York, if somebody claims all those things, like they start claiming some key things like going to Pittsburgh or down to Washington, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult, because now players are going to have to go around to other areas. Oklahoma City is another choking point here, trying to go through the Midwest. There's some, you've got some things where you can get around. It's going to take you a little bit while. And then down here in California, like Las Vegas is probably one of the most, this one is probably one of the most vulnerable spots, because you literally have one way in and one way out.
And I would also add to that Calgary up in the the northern half of the board. In the corner here, the one space area at the very corner.
Oh, that's Calgary, and then also Vancouver.
Yes, those two are very, very tight. And if you need that and you can't get to that, you can be blocked so easily. You just need to keep that in mind.
All right. One of the other things that this game offers, you do have a decent variety of destinations to go after in the game. And one of the things that you're going to have to do is think about your game as you're going along. You have to try and seize the opportunities to claim routes. One of the things that I like to do is I like to establish a backbone of work on claiming routes that go along with the destinations that I have, but they also are going to set me up for future turns where I can pick up destination tickets, where it makes it easy for me to connect a large number of cities. But, we've got that tight competition, and the other thing is when you're going around the game, you have to realize in your turn when you're going to play cards how you're going to manage your hand. These are a lot shorter routes. They're not worth as many points, but you can get trains out faster.
Right.
Although, this is only 2 points, whereas if you put out a 4 route, this is 2 turns, I could put out 4 trains, that's going to only net me 4 points. Whereas if I claim this one route here in 1 turn, this is going to give me 7 points for a 4 route. So you have to weigh the options of how you're going to go put your trains on the board. I think that's going to be a key decision in playing the game.
Yeah, you have to be really reactive. You have to be paying attention. You have to be very reactive to the other players at the table.
Right, and this is going to be a universal. This is going to be a universal strategy for all of the Ticket to Ride maps, and that is how you're going to manage your hand.
Yeah.
This is like kind of the essential thing, and a lot of things that we're talking about in this video are going to carry over into some of the future episodes as well. So we talk about the scoring, and then we have to go. We do have the variety of destinations. We have, when we're trying to do things, we have longer destinations. Trying to connect all the way across the country, they're going to yield you big points, but it's going to take you longer to get there, and you're more at risk of being cut off. So that's pretty much going to be like an overview of the game. Let's see. We could talk about a few other things, Chris. Let's talk about some of the positives in the game. What do you want to talk about? We can share this because I think we've got similar lists.
A lot of ours is same, and I have mine written down here.
Yeah, so do I. And I know that the one thing that we can talk about for sure is that the simple rules.
Yes, it is very simple.
Yeah. If we look at the rule book, it's literally like it's literally a couple of sheets. Tells you about how to set up the game. Very easy to set up. Here's what your object of the game is. It tells you on your turn what are the 3 things that we can do, which we talked about before. Talks about the different cards, how to claim your routes. Even has visual description so you can see in the examples how to do things. And then on the back, it shows you the scoring table, which is already printed on the board, and then it talks about your destination tickets and then game ending and your scoring and stuff. So very, 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 very simple game in terms of mechanics to play. And it's also easy to teach. When you only have a few rules, you can get this up and running. So those are the two things. That's a positive thing. What's some of your other positives?
Well, a lot of these we've already discussed, but the one I noticed is, we kind of already said this in the beginning of the video, but if you know the map, it's going to be a lot easier for you to kind of anchor yourself. So if you know a lot of the Midwest and, you know, the U.S., it's going to be a lot easier for you.
Yes, this is definitely going to be a game where people who live in the United States are going to be able to do much better at this, knowing the geography, opposed to some of the other maps.
And the other one that I have is, it's best with 4 to 5 players.
Yes. I like the competition. I think it's a lot tighter. If you're only playing this with 2 players, this whole map is open, and it's kind of like, well...
Same thing with 3 players as well.
Yeah, I would probably say that there's, you know, it's like somebody's going to start working over on one side of the board, and another person can go over on the other side of the board. You're going to be wasting turns trying to go over and claim routes to block someone.
And very, very seldom do you meet in the middle. It's like what Dave said. You could start on one end and not get bothered at all by the other player.
Yeah, although, I mean, you can if you end up choosing initial destination tickets, but with so much space, the competition in here is not as much at lower player counts.
Right.
We'll talk. That's going to be more of a negative, but it is better at a higher player counts. I prefer playing the game at 5 players. Right. That's my favorite.
I agree.
See, to me, like, one of the other positives, I think there's a high amount of replayability on here. The game plays over really quick. In fact, Chris, earlier this year, we went to FlatCon, that convention in Bloomington, Indiana.
We got through what?
Two games in 2 hours.
Yeah.
5-player games.
Yes. 2
5-player games in less than 2 hours.
And I also guess another positive, while we're on the positive side, is once you get to know the game, you can crank out a game in a half an hour.
Right.
Give or take.
Right.
You know, I mean, with my family and I, we can get through like 4 games in 2 hours because, you know, setup is so easy. Everybody knows what they're doing.
Right.
And you can just go from there.
Mm-hmm. Another positive thing for me is I believe that this is a rock solid design.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because, and used to talk about, you know, like what you're in for. With Ticket to Ride, since the base game, there has been Ticket to Ride Europe, there has been Ticket to Ride Nordic countries, Markland, Germany. Those are all box sets. Rails and Sails came out.
Yeah, would be considered
then
box.
we also have map extension. We have 6 map extension packs. Some of those have dual maps, and each thing offers a different rules, different tweaks. But all in all, it all goes back to such a rock solid core design. If it was not a solid core design, we would not have all those other the other options to play in the future. Okay,
that's true.
So now, it's not all roses on this side of the game. There are some issues with this game. There are some negatives. Chris, what's one of the things that you like?
My top one is that when you get blocked in this game, it's so hard to negate that blocking and try to reevaluate your standing on the board. Because I think we'll get into this with Europe, but there's nothing to help you from being unblocked, essentially. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the negatives for me, we talked about this before, this is not the best map for 2 players.
No.
It's just too much space. There's other maps that are out there that are geared for lower player counts, which we'll talk about in the future. Another negative that I have, and you mentioned it before about a strategy, is there is no rules to prevent card hoarding. So you could have a bunch, there's no limit to the number of cards that you can have in your hand. So you could constantly be taking a lot of tickets. You're not putting stuff out on the board, but you are acquiring a lot of things, and all of a sudden, turn after turn after turn, you can go from having no trains on there to filling up half the board.
Right.
And it can be frustrating to certain players because you may be looking like, man, I really need orange tickets, and we have somebody who happens to have all the orange tickets, and every time they're draining cards, you're like, God, I can't find the cards I'm looking for. And we have somebody that that we play with who does like to hoard cards, and we've called them out on it a few times. I mean, we laugh about it now.
It is a strategy.
It is a strategy, and it's not,
it's very viable.
Yes, but but it can be a negative for certain people because it can add a level of frustration to the game because you're not getting the things that you need. Another thing that I think is a negative, and this is more like where the game's a little dim, is what I have. Is a lot of times with the longest train thing, once you see somebody start going for it, it almost becomes a predictable strategy that you know that somebody's going to be going for that.
And I think your best option if you see somebody going for the longest train is if it helps you to help block that player while still trying to somehow complete your tickets, go for it. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard to stop.
Usually your longest train, you're going to see somebody starting in Los Angeles and going down around here and trying to claim up all these things to get the points, or they'll go up along the top. Takes a while, but they're usually that's what they're going to be trying to go for. And typically when somebody's doing that, you're going to start seeing the trains going there. It's like, oh well, they're trying to go for that longest train award, so it becomes predictable. The other thing too in this game is, even though I said there is a variety of destination cards, there's a lack of a large variety. There's only
the pile is, I mean,
30 cards.
That's it. 30 cards, and I have played this particular map so many times where we just keep on recycling the same discards.
Right.
And it's not always the best thing.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that's. Do you have any other negatives?
This might be mentionable. There's no really catch-up mechanic that if you're behind enough and you can tell, there's nothing you can really do except for what I do usually if I know I'm not going to win, which I don't mind losing, but you always try to rush and get your trains down to 2 or less.
Right.
And try to end the game faster, and it makes the person in the lead or in the first 2 positions to really rush on their end because they're taking their time getting points here and there. But if you rush and you know you're not going to be ahead, then just try to rush it and see where it leads.
Right. So that's a pretty good overview of the base game. We're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of things that can be addressed in this particular one. We did talk about one of the things with the this being a lack of variety in the destination tickets, and a couple years after the game released, they came out with a 1910 USA 1910 expansion, and this is all cards, and it adds some new things to it that's gonna affect this game. First of all, what they did was they came out with, there's a rule sheet in here, it explains what happens. They give you a full set of full-size train cards.
So you no longer need the
the mini cards can be out. Get rid of them. In fact, I have 2 copies of the base game now. My first one I actually tossed the mini cards. But anyways, we get a full set of the mini cards. There's also going to be a full set of the destination tickets, and it's going to give you 35 new destinations to go for, and they all say 1910 up in the corner. So gives you more variety, ways to score points.
Yep.
There was also a mini expansion that came out called the Mystery Train. That a lot of people, it was a weird thing given out at Essen, and they actually took 4 of the cards from the Mystery Train expansion and added them as destinations in here. There's a really short one, like look at this, Vancouver to Portland for 2 points. I mean, literally you just have to put out 2 trains to connect from there to there. The other thing that they did was in the base game, they adjusted the value of 4 of the destination tickets. They made them worth less points.
Do you know which ones they were?
I don't offhand. I would have to actually do side-by-side comparison. So, and then the last thing that they did was they added another card award called the Globetrotter. And what that does is that will award 10 points to the person who is...
15.
15. Okay.
Yes.
Whoever completes the most of these destination tickets. So it becomes, that's 15 points is a lot because that's worth a hefty amount of points. It's a decent size destination here. It's basically free points. But what it does is it encourages you to
Dig through this pile.
Get your trains out on the board and go after a lot of destinations. And it works out sometimes for me, especially with that strategy of building a backbone. You know, like usually I try to go right up the middle here and branch off a little bit, and then I can start hitting things like I can get easily from like Houston to Chicago, and then if I go a little bit further, less effort to do that. So that's one of the things 1910 offers, and it gives you 3 different variants to play. You could play with only the 1910 cards.
Right. Which I think you said there's like 30?
35 of them. So you have 5 more cards that you could play with that are all new. You also can fish out all the ones that have, they say, big cities on them. You can play with only the big cities, which is going to make it really interesting trying to connect to those. Or you can play what they call the mega ticket using all of the tickets.
Which, in our family, that's what we end up doing.
Right.
We end up throwing the Globetrotter and the longest train into the mix, so that's what 35 points bonus.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get both or one of them, that's a pretty big chunk of points.
Yeah, and then a couple other things that we can, a couple things that can be added to the game too. This has more to do with Ticket to Ride Europe, but there was 1912, and this also can be used with the Ticket to Ride game in the fact that it adds what are called depots and warehouses, and what that does is players can put depots out on the board, and if you build into, every time you take tickets, you put cards into warehouses, and then if you go into a spot where a player has a depot, you can choose to empty out and basically get more cards. It's not something that I've ever really used. I just know that there's an option for you to play in the 1912 expansion.
I haven't played either. I've always wanted to, but I've never gotten around to it.
Yeah, it's just another way. It's actually an interesting way for you to add a bunch more cards to your hand.
In one go.
Yes. So that's one of the other things that you can do to spice up the 1910. And then the other thing too is there's another mini expansion. This is with Alvin and Dexter. And we're going to be covering like 1912, and we'll cover Alvin and Dexter more in the future. But what this does is this adds a little bit of chaos to the game, and it has an effect on the values of certain cities, where depending upon where they're at, it decreases their value. But you can also earn points by being the ones that are moving them around the most on the board. So something a little fun. Alvin, you get a chance to use later on in one of the other maps too, if you want to. But so those are the different things that we can use that were some of the expansions. There's one more that we don't have, and that's the dice expansion. So instead of collecting the train tickets, you actually would be rolling dice and trying to claim your routes on the board. So those are some of the things that you can also add that go along with this Ticket to Ride. So one other thing, as we wrap this up, and we'll also get to our final thoughts. I have a couple things that to talk about. I have some notes that say called "Pretty Pimpin' It Up." There were some translucent trains that are out there. You can probably find some on eBay unless you already have the game, but they were a promo back when in 2014, 13, 14.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
They Days of Wonder had them out to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the game, and then also they would have tournaments, and if you participated, you would get a set of trains. Whoever won would get a full set of the trains, and they're just a clear plastic in the matching colors that come in the game. So that was those are kind of a neat thing. Another thing is too that they actually, for the 10th anniversary, they took this game, made the map a lot larger, new artwork, cooler trains. We'll be doing an episode on the 10th anniversary edition, but they did have a special one for that. A couple other things that were available for the game. I actually just ordered a set because I didn't even know they were out there. I was researching, getting ready for this. There are character scoring markers, and if you look at on the board, on the top, the box here, there are going to be different different markers for each of the things. So one of them is a white glove. There is a red scarf is one of the markers. There is this little green hat from this boy. There's a yellow umbrella. There is a blue top hat, and then I believe somewhere on one of the other maps, I believe there's a guy, like an engineer, that has, there's like a whistle.
I believe that's in Europe, I believe.
Okay. And then there's also going to be an orange one that has a pumpkin, because one of the other things that was out there was the Halloween Freighter. It was really, really limited. They had little pumpkin trains, and it came with an orange station too, that for use in one of the other things. And then the last thing is that if you really want to pimp out your game, companies like MeepleSource.com has custom wooden train pieces that you can put out on your board. It's a little bit pricey, but if you love the game, that might be something that you really want to do, because every time you play out the game, bring out the game, and you have more cool stuff, the more you invest in it, the more you're going to want to play it.
Exactly.
So that's a pretty solid overview of the Ticket to Ride game. Final thoughts?
The sad part is I own everything that's out there, except for a few things, so I do enjoy the game a lot. Got my family into it, didn't expect that to happen, but, here we are, I've got everything for it, and every time I play it, I have a good time.
Yeah.
Everybody has played it has had a good time.
Yeah, and for me, not my favorite map, but I do like it. This is the first of the Ticket to Rides that I learned to play. But I think that just a rock solid game. This has actually moved up to become one of my more favorite games overall. It's in my
probably the last year or so, I think.
It's really risen to the top. It's in my probably top 3 games. It may actually be number 1 because of the fact that it's so easy to play. We play it a lot. Our group really tends to like this game. And we could spend a whole evening playing stuff, just going, hey, who wants to do a mini tour, and just go through playing the system. But it's a rock solid design. I really think that this is an essential game for a gaming library. A lot of people call it a gateway game. Yes, it is easy, and for people who are not used to playing like modern strategy games, modern board games, this is one, definitely one that you can add. It's also widely available. Yes. You can get it through hobby stores. You can get it at stores like Target, Walmart, Amazon.com, so all sorts of different places. But anyways, certainly a high recommendation for me, and it's the Ticket to Ride. This is the Ticket to Ride original game, 2004 Spiel des Jahres winner. So anyways, thanks for taking the time to sit with us and talk about this particular map. We also covered the 1910 expansion. So in the future, the next one up, we're going to be talking about Ticket to Ride Europe. So we'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.